Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
A very lively parliament session is on. In fact, it is the budget session masquerading as the monsoon session. A lot is being said, and there is a lot of other news. A budget has just been presented. So we could be talking about that again. But now I don't particularly like using that expression but too much, because usually it involves trying to cover up or trying to equivocate. I don't like that. Nevertheless, I shall say but. While all this is happening in Parliament, there's a budget on, but at the same time, we will shift to another topic. And that other topic is also very important. And today, I might have the apprehension that this will get lost in the din of the budget and other politics. And this is another loss, another potential loss of a capital asset by the Indian Navy. As you might have seen over the past couple of days, there have been stories. INS Brahmaputra, which is one of the frontline frigates of the Indian Navy, Brahmaputra class. The class is named after, or the ship is named after the class. There are three ships in the same class: Brahmaputra, Betwa, and Byas, named after three great rivers from three different parts of the country. That listed or that keeled over while while undergoing work at the docks in Mumbai. These are the premier docks of Indian Navy. Now there was a fire on the ship, it seems. While efforts were being made to put out the fire, the ship tilted to one side. Initially, the Navy said it's tilted, but you see the pictures, it's looking much worse than tilted. The fact is, it's not the first time this has happened. In fact, this is the second time this has happened within the same class. So, what's happened to Brahmaputra now in 2016 had happened to INS Betwa, almost exactly the same way. The Betwa, however, later was lifted, it was rescued, it cost a bunch of money, and we don't know what other damage was caused to its other systems and weaponry, etc. But the fact is, it was finally salvaged and it's sailing. Now, this has happened to INS Brahmaputra, doesn't look good for Indian Navy. That said, this makes us focus on an aspect of Indian Navy that we don't talk about very much. Very often, it is the Indian Air Force which gets attention for crashes, right? It had a history of crashes of MiG 21s. And while there was an impression that MiG 21s crashed too much or too often, the fact is that at 1.80, almost 80% of all combat flying assets of Indian Air Force were MiG 21s. I'm taking you right back, right? There was even a movie made about this, Rang De Basanti, and the Indian Air Force let the movie be made. In fact, also watched it, the air marshals watched it and cleared that movie. That shows a very healthy approach to what otherwise might be something that any of the armed forces would prefer not to talk about. That was admirable. At one point, in fact, at the peak of this MiG 21 fear, I requested the Indian Air Force to let me go to one of their bases flying MiG 21s and spend some time to record a walk the talk with two active MiG 21 pilots. And that's when they enabled me to go to Ambala, the airbase in Ambala. You will see some stills of that walk the talk. I will also try and share a link with you if you can find it from NDTV's website. The Navy, however, has not get so much focus. Now, because of the INS Brahmaputra incident, because a few things have happened sort of in succession over the past few years very quickly, it's also made us look at the record of the Indian Navy. And it looks like there is a record of frequent accidents, not just frequent accidents causing fatalities or injuries. This is the profession of the arms. Those things will happen. This is not civilian flying. This is not airlines controlled by IATA and your own DGCA flying in the safest possible conditions. Combat flying, combat sailing, combat movement, driving a convoy anywhere. All these are pursuits that involve risks. However, we have to see the history of Indian Navy's accidents over the past 30 years. If we see that, and and this is only because of Brahmputra that I got back looking at some of this. And when we look back, we find that the loss of large assets or capital assets, as we might call them, that's a sizable ship, a ship of some size, not a chota petrol boat, a ship of some size or a submarine. That's been happening rather frequently with Indian Navy, right? I will count some for you. I list some for you. I'm not giving you any secrets. All of this stuff is available on Wikipedia. In fact, if you just go to Wikipedia and ask for Indian naval accidents, you will find this entire list there along with links giving you articles on these accidents. You can go and ask Chat GPT, give me a list of Indian naval accidents. They will give it to you readily. So there are no secrets being shared here. Now, look at the capital assets lost. I'm only counting those cases, first of all, where ships or vessels have been lost. And then I will give you some more details. And once I'm done with that, I will have Snehesh Philip, who's our editor for defense. He will join in and explain to us or help us understand some of the finer, more complicated aspects of this. So first of all, I'm going back just about 30 years, 35 years, right? 1990, INS Andaman, which was an Arnala class corvette. Now, corvette is the smallest of the combat vessels of any size. It is smaller than a frigate, which in turn is smaller than a destroyer. That is generally the hierarchy in size. So this was a corvette which was coming back after an anti-submarine warfare exercise near the Andamans, through the Andaman Seas, and sank on its way back to Vizag Harbor. This was in August 1990. The vessel was lost and 15 sailors and officers died with it. That was a bad incident, and later it turned out that probably there was water leakage from somewhere in the back of the ship, from the aft side, which wasn't attended to in time, and that led to the ship sinking. That was at that point seen as quite a setback. After that, in 2006, Prahar, INS Prahar, again a corvette, a Veer class corvette. This was lost in April 2006. Then January 2011, INS Vindhyagiri, which was a Nilgiri class frigate, that was lost. I'm not giving any details. I'll come to details in a bit. After that, in August 2013, that's the incident all of us remember most starkly, INS Sindhu Rakshak. That was a Kilo class Soviet-made submarine of the Indian Navy. It sank in Mumbai Harbor with 18 killed, 15 sailors and 3 officers. Not long after that, another Kilo class submarine in the same group also came to grief, although it survived. That was INS Sindhu Ratna, and that happened in 2014. That's when another incident on a Kilo class submarine, in this case INS Sindhu Ratna, resulted in two deaths and injuries to 7. In the same year, in November, Astravahini, which is a small vessel, torpedo recovery vessel, that sank off the coast of Vizag while it was on a routine exercise, just about 35-40 kilometers away, right? Of the 28 on board, 24 were rescued, but the vessel was lost. I'm only talking about vessels which have been lost in the last 35 years. On 6th of December 2016, it toppled over in dry dock. So in fact, 2 vessels of the 3 vessel Brahmputra group have toppled over in the docks, in the Mumbai docks, right? One in dry dock, second following a fire. We don't know any more details because it's too recent. So 6th of December 2016, INS Betwa, I told you earlier that it was later lifted up. It cost a bunch of money to lift it up, put it back in water, but it was put back in water. Then July 2024, as we know now, INS Brahmputra has gone down. We don't know its future because Before it went down on one side, it had quite a sizable fire, and if you see videos of those fires, you can see the metal also melting. So intense was the fire. So this is generally the short list of the more serious accident that the Indian Navy has had. We are not counting any of the incidents with naval aviation, because naval aviation loses aircraft, unfortunately, very unfortunately, and that applies to all classes of aircraft. The Navy ships, however, is a different category because these are large ships. This is peacetime. These ships also, military maneuvers, always carry some risk. But I would say that if you look at the history of navies, the big navies across the world, and the history of their accidents, and you net that off with the number of ships, number of sailing hours, the distances to which they go, it would seem like Indian Navy's accident rate is worrying. So just as we worry about Indian Air Force's accident rate, we also need to think about Indian Navy's accident rate. This is something that Navy officers talk about. We do see concern being expressed about many thinking naval officers and naval veterans. There is KP Sanjeev Kumar, who's a former naval aviator and test pilot, whose article we also carried on the print. You will see, I will share a link with you. You can also see it on your screens. He writes, in fact, in a tweet after his article and after he got responses, including one from a vice admiral. We'll try and find those tweets and share with you. Also from Commodore Uday Bhaskar, who's a former naval officer and also a prolific writer on strategic affairs, KP Sanjeev Kumar, who tweets under the handle KPS. He's written, "If I am unable to sleep because of a preventable naval accident and probable hull loss, it must be me. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am too unprofessional or too critical of what passes for basic naval operational hazards today." Right? That is what he's saying. And see some of the responses he's getting. So one of the responses he's got is from Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, also a veteran of the Air Force. He also writes often, who comments on KP Sanjeev Kumar's piece, and he says, "What an apt piece. So sad that we are not even talking about it just one day after the tragedy. It's just the budget and the same mundane comments of the same people. As real KPS says, it's Manuki. Why should I bother, right? How does it matter to me?" Actually, it's such a sad state that one can't even appreciate the humor. And once again, I quote from the real KPS, KP Sanjeev Kumar, who said, "These days, where art and drama hardly mirror real life and real life approaches drama, I hope we have not reached the Manuki Tenuki pass. My thoughts on the Brahmputra incident, reflections on INS Brahmaputra fire and flooding incident." That's the article we've also carried on the print. Now, seeing all that and seeing the need to debate and discuss this and to bring it in public debate and parliament debate as much as the Air Force accidents have been brought in. The Navy, however, does not get so much notice for these things because Navy, in a way, we live in landlocked Delhi. Our minds are landlocked, right? So Navy is far away, and the Navy is not that frequently involved in combat. Usually, in our kind of strategic environment, for the Navy to get into combat or combat-like situations, things have to get really dire between us, as in India, and one of our adversaries. That's the reason we thought this is something to talk about. Now, if you look at the data, I told you that it's all available on public platforms. There have also been at least two occasions when the defense minister has placed on the floor of parliament. November 2014, it was the defense minister in the Modi government who produced a list of naval accidents in Rajya Sabha. There was also a CAG report in 2017 which has listed these accidents. Now, having given you all those details, I will not read the laundry list of all the other accidents which have taken place. I will just call in the expert, our own resident expert, Snehesh Philip, at this point. Please tell us what's happening with the Navy and how serious is this incident? What exactly has happened with INS Brahmaputra and how serious is this incident? Plus, whatever you might know about what happened and how it happened.
The whatever that has happened on Sunday is a very serious incident. The fact is that this, as you rightly mentioned earlier, that this is the second ship of the same class which is facing this particular situation. On Sunday, there was a fire which took place while the ship was undergoing refit at the naval dockyard in Mumbai, and it was the fire was detected late in the evening, and then the firefighting happened. On Monday is when the ship, as the Navy calls it, started listing towards one side, and then eventually it nearly, keeled over. Now, while a board of inquiry has been constituted into this whole incident, what we've come to know so far is the fact that because of the firefighting, there was too much water that was pumped into the ship, which led to what one would say is disconnect between the gravity and the metacentric height got disturbed. So, which that's a technical term which
That's
is
too much
there.
physics for me.
Too much
Right.
physics, but the fact is that this is a very serious incident. The efforts are now on to salvage the particular ship,
I mean,
like the
let me
delay.
try and simplify it. But physicists among our audiences, please forgive me. I never got more than 34 out of 100 in physics, and I felt liberated after class 11 when I was rid of physics. Right? It's a bit like saying that if you have a vessel, you pour too much water in one area, the the
Yeah,
vessel gets imbalanced for weight,
yeah.
and that's why it can topple over on the other side.
Yeah, and that's what it happened here also. That's what is suspected to have happened. But the fact is that this is a very serious incident, and you mentioned that and you rightly mentioned that this is one of the major accidents that the Navy has witnessed.
You said there's a court of inquiry. What
Yeah.
happens in India when there's a court of inquiry? Do we ever get to know what happened? Are these reports at least placed before Parliament,
No,
before
these reports,
CAG, anybody?
these reports are not placed before the parliament, and these reports are not also open to public. But these reports are internal reports, which are then submitted to the Ministry of Defence. So, in specific cases, these are usually kept as very
Confidential.
confidential, very secretive. But in the past, whenever have such incidents have happened, the commanding officer of the particular ship has been cashiered from service, has been court-martialed. So those steps have been taken in the past, and this is what the Navy, this is what we know so far. But in terms of
But
exactly,
isn't that the softest target?
exactly, that is the as you rightly mentioned, that's the softest target. In this case, also you would see in the few months that actions would be taken, and most likely the commanding officer would face music.
So that says round up the usual suspect. Remember that
That's
line from Casablanca, right?
that's what happens. That's sadly that's what happens here.
So I have a tweet from somebody who writes about defense, but tweets as IAC2, Hamlet he calls himself, or he or she,
Oh
says,
yes,
and this is a link of a US Navy inquiry report into the Bonhomme Richard fire made public to the taxpayer. And the report is there, the link is there, and the person says, where are our accident investigations for public scrutiny? Will straight shooting veterans call for the Indian military to emulate actual Vishwaguru standards? Right? So this is obviously it's an Indian military enthusiast who feels strongly about the
yeah,
state of the Indian military and is speaking in some bit of anger
anger, despair, yeah.
and despair. Uh, Other accidents that have taken place, do I see a pattern that too many of these accidents have taken place in the Bombay Dock, Bombay Harbor area?
Well, many accidents have taken place in the Bombay dock, and many of these accidents have, for example, you've had submarines and you have ships hitting merchant vessels and other vessels, private vessels, when they're entering the harbor. Now, the Navy would say that the Bombay harbor is a very small harbor, which leads to a lot of, as they would say, traffic jam in a kind of a situation, right, where there are multiple ships, so it becomes difficult to maneuver. That's what the Navy would say. But the fact is that that in terms of the spate of accidents, while you rightly mentioned earlier that it's a combat job, accidents will happen. There are risks attached to it, but the frequency of accidents or the rate of accidents in comparison to other navies, for example, is much higher.
The loss of one capital assets every 5 years for the past 35 years. That's not acceptable.
Absolutely, and this is all in peacetime. For example, if you look at the U.S. Navy figures from I think from the World War II, they have lost about 13 capital assets from World War II. But remember that all of them are not in peacetime. They have lost capital assets during the war with Korea. They have lost a capital asset when the Israeli forces attacked them way back in the 1960s. So they have also
And it's
been
been
in
a
combat,
700 ship navy for a
and
long time. Yeah.
it's a huge navy. But so though, but only 13 assets have been lost since then. But in terms of the Indian Navy, the spate of accidents is much higher. But that is also true with the Indian Air Force also. The counter to that is the fact that the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force operates on a much higher, well, a constant scale, right? So there is a sense of complacency that comes in. There is a sense of tiredness that would come in where safety protocols are not really followed. It's at times, and but that's the bane with with us as a country also, is a very chalta hua attitude, right? For example, when I go to I've been lucky enough to go and visit bases abroad. I've visited shipyards where I'm amazed at the safety protocols that is folled, right?
Including fire, leakage,
Including
everything.
fire, leakages. Even our own visits to those shipyards are heavily controlled. You have to follow all kinds of protocols.
And you have protective gear.
You have protective gear and all, but in India, the focus on safety is not really there. And this was something that was also flagged by the CAG in 2017 on the fact that the safety mechanisms were not in full safety mechanisms were not in place, and the safety mechanisms, whatever were in place, were not followed. So as I said, it's something to do with the chaltai attitude.
Yeah. Now the crowding in Mumbai Harbor, I might have a different view on it editorially, which I will mention towards the conclusion of this episode, not just now. Uh, but see what's happened there. 2005 December. In fact, I forgot to mention this in the list of capital assets lost when I was reading it up. Maybe I was too heartbroken to mention all of them. 2005, a full Talwar class frigate. A frigate is a large ship, right? It's a large ship, it's a sizable ship. It can operate on its own. It is part of the escort for your flagship, for your aircraft carrier, etc. etc. Talwar class frigate, very potent ship, that was INS Trishul. It collided with a merchant vessel, MV Ambuja Lakshmi, in Bombay Harbor, and it collided side on while returning from training. Now, there were no casualties, but there was a collision. Then, September 2006, INS Dunagiri, again Nilgiri class frigate, collided off Bombay of the same harbor with MV Kirti, suffered extensive damage. There were no casualties but suffered extensive damage. Then 2008, INS Sindhu Ghosh, another of those kilo class vessels. So Sindhu Rakshak had trouble, unfortunately it sank. Sindhu Ratna had serious trouble, subsequently resulting in casualties, though the vessel survived and the vessel is sailing, it's in service now. In the same series, in the same group, INS Sindhu Ghosh, in January 2008, it collided also with a merchant vessel, MV Leeds Castle, and this happened when the submarine was trying to surface. The damage wasn't that much, but it also tells you that Mumbai Harbor is much too crowded for an active naval fleet to be operating there, because a naval fleet can't operate like a merchant fleet, like a merchant vessel each time, and you wait for your time to come and dock, you wait for your time, any time to go out. So there is a jam issue at Mumbai Harbor. And then we can go on and on. In Mumbai Harbor, January 2011, INS Vindhyagiri, again in Nilgiri class frigate, it collided with the merchant vessel MV Nordlake and it sank. it capsized, although fortunately all the crew on the ship were saved unharmed. They were saved. And this happened off one of the three lighthouses on Bombay Harbor. That is the Sunk Rock Lighthouse. Then in December 2013, INS Talwar, remember we mentioned another Talwar class frigate earlier in 2005, INS Trishul. INS Talwar collided with a fishing trawler. Four on the fishing trawler were injured, 23 were rescued safely, and the fishing trawler sank. Right? The commander of the ship, as I read from generally published material, was removed. As you say, it's the commander who takes the rap. Then again, Bombay, same month, there were three accidents in December 2013. INS Tarkash, again a Talwar class frigate, it hit the jetty in Mumbai Naval Base. And then INS Betwa, which features later in 2016 because it keeled over in dry dock. Then January 14, INS Betwa, Brahmputra class, it ran aground. It ran aground because it looks like there was something wrong with its sonar. Water leaked into it. So it ran aground and collided with some unidentified object. This is really looking dire, not just for the Navy, but it's looking dire for the Mumbai docks, the Mumbai Harbor, and should raise some questions about how much, how dependent can Indian Navy afford to be of the Mumbai Harbor and the Mumbai docks?
True, that's a very interesting point. That the Mumbai Harbor is much more congested, whether in terms of a full command itself to be based out of, for the entire fleet to be based out of Mumbai, is something that the Navy, one would really have to take a look into it. But in terms of accidents, while the list just continues, but also remember that there were important capital assets, like for example INS Arihant, which is India's indigenous nuclear submarine, or you had the Chakra series.
It is an SSBN. It's a
Yeah.
nuclear powered submarine which is supposed to carry nuclear missiles as
Yes,
well.
so it's the India's first SSBN. Then you have the SSN that was leased from Russia, the Chakra,
Chakra.
and who have also seen accidents, which made them unoperable for nearly a
In fact,
year.
Arihant had an accident in which some outside workers were killed. I think one was killed because the lid on the hydraulic chamber under construction blew and fell on the worker.
So that's still under wraps exactly what really happened there. But the fact is that both these
I am
submarines.
telling you from published material.
Yes, there are a lot of there are a lot of information on this exactly, but we don't know for sure what exactly happened then. But the fact is that both these submarines were out of service for nearly a year, and then you have the case of INS Vikramaditya, India's at that time the lone
Flagship.
aircraft carrier, the flagship, which was out of service for nearly year and a half, 2 years, because it was undergoing refit. When it was ready, there was a fire that was on board the aircraft carrier, so it again had to undergo a lot of refits. So the list of accidents would increase.
INS Ranveer is also had fatal accidents on board, but ship was unharmed.
Yeah, so the list just continues. The fact is that when it comes to, the Navy is a very small force right now. The Indian Navy would be somewhere about close to above 130 odd ships that the Indian Navy would have, and this includes all kinds of from the corvettes to the destroyers, the frigates, and the aircraft carrier.
To gunboats, patrol boats.
Yes, so this is this
Although
this
Coast Guard has taken a lot of that slack, but still.
yeah, and then the Indian Navy plans to be a 170 strong force by 2030. It has come down from the initial plan of 200, but the fact is that it's not a large force to take in so many accidents, frequency of accidents, which also, as I said, as the CAG report in 2017 mentioned, this brings into question also the protocols, these safety protocols that are followed by the force as well as at the dockyard itself.
At the same time, you feel so proud when the Indian Navy goes out, operates against pirates, rescues people who are victims of piracy or ships which are hijacked by pirates, or goes and operates in the Red Sea to protect shipping from Houthi attacks and works with other friendly navies.
Absolutely. For example, as we speak right now, that's what I mentioned. The amount, the tempo of operations, even for a small 130 ship strong force, is much higher. Like as we speak right now, I'm not able to count, but at this point of time, there would be at least close to about seven simultaneous navy operations are undergoing right now. And when I say operations, I don't mean just combat operations where deployment is happening for the rim pack. You have, as you mentioned about the Houthis, that is happening. There is a deployment for Maldives, deployment that is happening with regard to Sri Lanka. So in terms of operations, so the Navy is constantly in, right? So I was speaking to one, and I was speaking to one officer, and I asked him, the reason about this spate of accidents. So he says, Snehesh, let's say I make you drive down to Amritsar, continuously, and then I give you a 5 minutes break, and then I say, let's drive back, right? You would be tired, a complacency will come in, and those accidents will happen. But at the same time, whatever justification one might give, the fact is that the Indian Navy cannot afford to have so many accidents. And India cannot afford to have so many accidents.
Because Indian Navy is critical to the whole idea of Quad.
Yes.
Because without Indian Navy, the Quad is nothing. However big a component the Americans might put in there, but if you look at all of the Indian Ocean going right up to Malacca Strait, Indian Navy is the pivot of the Quad, isn't it?
Absolutely. Indian Navy is the pivot of Quad. Indian Navy is as pivot and a critical part of the Quad system as it is envisaged.
And going ahead, it is widely believed in the strategic circles that the weight of strategic balancing will now shift to the seas from land borders. Although Xi Jinping might have distracted everybody by coming in creating this trouble in East Ladakh, but globally, in the strategic world, it's well known that the power balance that's most critical is what exists on the sea and what might evolve on the seas.
And this is what China is exactly doing. As we speak, China is the fastest growing navy in the world. In terms of the number of aircraft carriers, in terms of number of destroyers it is coming out with, it's like they have a how the cookie cutter works, right? One after the other. So the US has also noticed this strength, and they are also alarmed at the pace at which the China is increasing its naval might, which shows what you rightly mentioned, that in future the navy or the blue waters would play a very crucial role when it comes to force projection or when it comes to countries' own strategic interests.
And that's why it's even more important for us to take the debate to the Indian Navy as well. That is something that's been, in a way, overly focused on, or at least focused, let me not say overly focused on Indian Air Force. The Navy also has to be part of that debate. That said, I'd warned you that I have an editorial view on the Navy and the Mumbai Harbor. I'd say the Mumbai Harbor is too crowded, the area is too urbanized, there is too much other shipping, too many other faltu boats in that area. There is also a lot of recreational activity in that area. I'd say that maybe I know no armed forces like to leave any territory, whether they are on land or on water. And this is the premier harbor of the country. But really, if, is it smart of a blue water navy to continue to harbor its most important assets, naval assets, in the busiest in the harbor of the busiest metropolis in the country? Probably that's the reason why Karwar was chosen way down to the south from Mumbai. So Mumbai, the overcrowding in Mumbai and this history of accidents probably holds a lesson. It's unlikely, though, that the Indian Navy today or maybe in the foreseeable future would worry too much about it.
Well, they would worry, and that's why, as you said, Karwar is coming up. But if you mentioned that whether they would give up Mumbai, that's something that no force would ever do. That in the military, the common joke in the military is that when it comes to choosing the services, army ka bandobast, air force ka teshan, or navy ki posting, because in navy the postings are in Bombay, in Kochi, or in Goa, or in Vizag.
Goa,
That's
yeah.
it. Or in Delhi. That's it.
So repeat that. Repeat that. That's a good one.
It's army की बंदोबस्त, air force का टेशन और navy की posting. So if you get all the three, then आपके हाथ में लड्डू हैं.
We can only wish and hope that all three remain safe all the time.